Welcome to TEDx William & Mary. My name is Grace Engel, and along with Alexander Knox, I am an executive co-chair of the TEDx Executive Committee. So if any of you are wondering what exactly TEDx is, although you're already here, it is a student-run committee from students right here at William & Mary who is dedicated to bringing the TED experience to people like you in places like this. We hope that the 7 talks that you hear tonight will be thought-provoking for you and spark discussions that extend beyond this auditorium. And to get that started, we are lucky to have with us our student body president and vice president here to give you our opening remarks and introduce to you the theme of tonight's event. Please join me in welcoming Brendan Boylan and Samir Tawalari.
Hello, William and Mary. My name is Brendan Boylan, and I'm the president of the Student Assembly.
And my name is Samir Tawalari, and I am the vice president of the Student Assembly.
Wow, what a crowd, what a crowd. We are so lucky and so thrilled to have another year of partnership between the Student Assembly and TEDx to bring this wonderful array of speakers to you tonight. William and Mary is a crossroads of passion and scholarship, and TEDx embodies that spirit by bringing together students, faculty, and guests to share their experiences and their stories and their perspective on this year's theme, Crossroads. Where have we been, where are we now, and where are we going?
In addition to what Brendan mentioned, William and Mary is a crossroads of progress and history that we must understand and about which we must think critically. On top of all of that, William and Mary is also at a crossroads in its own development following the inauguration of President Roe. We know what we have to do to make William & Mary a better place for all the members of our community. And now, moving forward, we can act to make sure we bring our university forward with us. Tonight's event is a beautiful opportunity to listen to and learn from some incredible humans, both from within and beyond the William & Mary community. And as President Roe has demonstrated, listening to the members of our community helps us find the best ways forward from the crossroads which we encounter.
So thank you so much for coming and for sharing this night with us and to hear these wonderful stories.
And we hope you have an awesome evening. We will see you at the reception upstairs in Tidewater after, and we hope you have a great night.
Our first speaker tonight is the CEO of DC Central Kitchen, which is the nation's first community kitchen. In his work there, he trains the chronically unemployed for jobs in the culinary arts and helps to feed the hungry. He's here tonight to talk to you about his experience and the lessons that he's learned there. Specifically, the first rule of righteous entrepreneurs. Please welcome Mike Curtin.
Good evening. Don't start the clock yet. As the first speaker here, I'm going to take a quick point of privilege, so you hopefully don't have to hear this from all of us. But on behalf of all of the speakers here tonight, I want to thank the College of William & Mary for hosting this event, inviting us here to share some of our Crossroads stories with you. I'd also like to thank, on behalf, again, of all of us, Grace Engel and Alexander Knox, 2 amazing student leaders who've been working on this program since last year with their executive board to make this look easy. And I know from doing events that the easier they look, the harder they are to put on, and you guys have made this look easy. So thank you and congratulations. And so you will see the executive board members. They have the William & Mary lanyards and the name tags, and then all the volunteers, the dozens and dozens of volunteers that make this happen. So when you see them afterwards, thank them as well. They've put a lot in to welcome us and put this event on for you. And I also want to thank you on behalf of all of us for choosing this topic, Crossroads. Fascinating idea, and you're going to hear a whole spectrum of different kinds of stories. While we could not have imagined when we encountered our crossroads moment, it has profoundly impacted the identity of DC Central Kitchen, the path we are on now, and the path that we will follow into the future. Prior to this, we were really seen mostly as a feeding organization, mostly because we put thousands of meals into the community every day. But we knew from the very beginning that no matter how hard we tried, food would never end hunger. We would never feed our way out of hunger. And so that's why we always focused on empowerment through our culinary job training program, working with men and women who had faced incredible barriers of incarceration, of addiction, of abuse, of trauma, of homelessness, and worked to get them jobs in the hospitality business. And to move the ball a little forward, in the 1990s, we started a catering company. Now, at that time, the notion of social business or social enterprise really wasn't part of our national dialogue or even talked about within the sector. So we wanted to find a word that was a little sexier, that would sort of challenge people's ideas to wonder about the work that we were doing. So we started calling ourselves righteous entrepreneurs. And to define that righteous entrepreneur, we came up with 8 rules for righteous entrepreneurs. And the crossroads moment that I'm going to tell you about tonight is a really phenomenal illustration of the first rule, which is it's okay to be a little antisocial in pursuit of your mission. So we were doing our feeding thing, our training thing, our catering thing, and in 2006 we engaged the District of Columbia government in a discussion about the quality, the quantity of meals, and the cost of those meals. We've been putting thousands of meals into DC shelters every single day for 17 years for free. We wanted to do better, they wanted better food, but we just couldn't swing it using donated food and the resources we had. So we suggested that they put in a little money. We thought this would be a fairly quick conversation that ended up being 9 months of hearings and meetings and different deputy mayors. And finally, at the end of that process, they said, yes, you're right. We do have a responsibility here. We should put some money in. We're going to draw up a contract and we'll have it to you ready to go in 2 weeks. Great. So that 2 weeks turned into a month. And a month turned into 2 months. And then we said, no. We simply cannot allow the work that we do to be so devalued or undervalued, to be dismissed like that. If we were a business, if the men and women we worked with, that we were out there to serve, were valued, were seen as important, were seen as part of our economic conversation, this wouldn't be happening. So this was our crossroads moment. We could go along like the sector had for years. You know, unfortunately, we let this happen. We were happy to say, sure, throw me your pennies and I'll solve your dollar problems. But that's not a sustainable model and it's just not smart. So we said, no, we're not just going to go along. We have to stand up and we have to do something big and bold. And we decided that we were going to go on strike. We said, until this contract is signed, until our work is valued, recognized for what it is as part of the economic investment in this community, we will not deliver these meals. And to make the point that this was not just some stunt, and this was about a larger picture, Robert Egger, the other guy you see in the picture up there, our founder, and I said, we're not going to eat either. And so that started, you can call it a fast or a hunger strike. We didn't eat for what became 8 days. And that was a scary time. I had no idea what was going to happen. I had never done this before. Most sane people wouldn't. And we didn't know what was going to happen with DC Central Kitchen, how long this was going to go on, how it was going to end. This could have been the end of DC Central Kitchen. But even though I was scared, I had never been more convinced that what we were doing was right. And it was a lonely time. A lot of nonprofits called up and said, we're right behind you. And that's where they were, right behind us. We asked them, come up and be in a press conference. But no one wanted to stand next to us because they didn't want to rock the boat. They didn't want to hurt their funding. And personally, it was a lonely time. Think about the social interaction we have and how much of that is based on food and around food. And if you lose that, you can't be part of it. There's an incredible sense of isolation. But even though I felt that lonely, I never felt like I had been part of something bigger than myself. And as you can see up here, we were in the Washington Post, we were on TV, radio, and ultimately we won. We got what we wanted. We got a revenue stream coming into the kitchen, and quickly we realized as we started buying food that we could multiply our social impact by purposefully thinking about how and from whom we were buying that food. So we went directly to farmers, local farmers, that we had donated to us through farmers markets and said, we're going to buy from you, but we're going to buy from you the product that is geometrically or aesthetically challenged in such a way that it has no commercial value. So we're going to create a revenue stream for you that never existed. Hundreds of thousands of dollars going into rural communities, hundreds of thousands of pounds of good product coming into DC Central Kitchen. We had to add shifts, engage more volunteers, hire more graduates from our training program, promote graduates that were working for us so they could get more responsibility and more money. And things were going great. And then 2008 rolled in, the recession. Nonprofits freaked. Thousands closed their doors. Thousands more panicked, cut staff, cut programming. And the kitchen, being the righteous and contrarian entrepreneurs that we were, said we have to do the opposite. We actually have to expand our mission footprint. But we have to do it in a way where we're not relying on philanthropy. We need more righteous enterprise. But we need it that's scalable and sustainable. And we settled on school food. So we pitched a new school that had just opened, a tuition-free private middle school for at-risk boys. And we became their food contractor. We embedded our graduates in their kitchen and cooked them breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day. Immediately doubled our staff, added $2.5 million to our budget, and positioned ourselves for 2010 when, after Mrs. Obama's work, we'd like to think, modeled after the work that we were doing. Not 100% true that that happened. But I will tell you this, she never said it didn't. So thanks to Mrs. Obama, lots of school districts, including the District of Columbia, wanted to upgrade their school food. They carved out a request for proposal for a small number of schools for locally sourced, scratch-cooked school food. We bid on that. We got that. And over the next 10 years, we tripled that program, and our social enterprise portfolio ballooned to $9 million, over 60% of our budget, but more importantly, added 80 jobs. Most of those are held by graduates of our culinary job training program. And all of this can be traced directly back to that crossroads moment when we could have gone along or stood up and said no, and took an incredible leap of faith. As Dr. King said, taking that leap of faith, a true leap of faith, is that first step when you can't see the rest of the staircase. And I was thinking about that moment last summer. I had been invited to attend an event marking the 50th anniversary of the death of Bobby Kennedy. And 50 years ago, as a 4-year-old boy, that was my first childhood memory. It was the morning after Bobby was murdered. And I was sitting in the amphitheater at Arlington Cemetery. I had gone by myself, but I was surrounded by 1,000 or so people, and I thought of this picture that hangs in my office. This is Bobby campaigning in '68, and see all those people, the frenzy of people reaching out and saying, I want more. I want to be part of something bigger than myself. That liberation, that hope, that freedom that we were all striving for. And at this event, most of the speakers just read Bobby's words. And one of the speakers read part of a speech that he gave in 1968 in South Africa, where he said, anytime someone stands up for a principle or strikes out against injustice or works to improve the lot of their fellow man, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And coming together from 1 million different centers of daring and courage, those ripples form a wave that will wipe down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. My young brothers and sisters, I encourage you, I implore you to stand up at that crossroads moment. Never underestimate your voice. Be heard. You can be those ripples, and together you will be that wave that will wash down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Thank you all very much.
Our next speaker is the current visual design coordinator right here at William & Mary. She graduated from James Madison University in 2015. But in the 4 years since then, her path to success has not been linear. She's here to talk to you about failure and what it means to define success as a young adult in modern America. She's here to ask you a question. Why did the millennial cross the road? Please welcome Sophia Ramsey.
Hi, everyone. How are we doing today? Can't believe we're packed here. Well, so to start off, I have a confession to make. I am a millennial. That may seem like a silly thing to confess, but lately that label incurs a lot of judgment. We're very misunderstood, we millennials, and I don't think many people have actively taken the time to understand why we have the reputation that we have. I don't believe many people have really thought about the upbringing that many of us had, how drastically the world has changed and how quickly it has changed, and specifically how those two factors have impacted how we view failure and how we view success. We have been raised to live very checklisted lives from very early on. These checklists start early with the ballet classes, the soccer practices, the clubs and the honor societies, the AP, IB, honor roll, dual enrollment classes that I'm sure all of you have gone through. There is this crippling pressure that I believe previous generations have never had to aspire to. We live these checklisted lives up until college, where we are expected to figure out what we want to do next. We live these checklisted lives, and that has left very little room to build self-efficacy. When we graduate, people ask some variation of the question, well, why did the millennial cross the road? They want to know what our motivation is and what drives us. And unfortunately, it is a very outdated and unhealthy perception of what it means to be successful. We millennials are entering the workforce a little bit broken, a little bit bruised before we even have a chance to experience the world and any true failure. If you grew up like I did, in an average middle-class suburban home with two loving parents, then college was probably the first time you ever really experienced failure. When I got to college, I thought things would be as easy as they had been my entire life. After all, I was top of my class, played on multiple varsity sports teams, did the clubs and the student government. What I didn't realize was that everyone else on campus had the same exact resume that I had. I was not prepared for the increased level of competition, although I'm sure my teachers tried to tell me. The rules changed, but I didn't feel like I knew what to do. My identity that I had built so far was so deeply wrapped up in my successes. I struggled. I failed a few classes. I internalized criticisms that I'd never before had to deal with, and I generally struggled to adapt to my ever-increasing workload. I caught a break, and I was offered an internship with the James Madison University Marketing Department, and that job gave me the confidence that I needed, and would later need, in my first design job after college. So, I graduated, and within 6 months, I had a job at a boutique design firm in DC. I was the millennial that crossed the road and reached her destination. Success, right? Well, a year later, my employer and I decided to part ways. We had some fundamental disagreements, and that resulted in me being fired from that job. I was distraught. I felt like an imposter. I couldn't even imagine applying for another design job, and I was considering if I should even stay in my career field. I took a year off from that part of my life to observe humanity in its natural habitat, to conduct an anthropological study, if you will. I became a bartender. I was actually pretty good at it, and I enjoyed interacting with a diverse group of people. I even gained some confidence when I realized that if I could communicate effectively with a drunk person, I could communicate with anyone. In actuality, that time off ended up being the gap year that I needed to gain some time and space and some perspective so I could figure out what I was going to do, what this whole thing meant for my perception of failure and success. This time ended up being a rapid period of growth, but this is in retrospect. There was a lot of pain, there was a lot of hard work, there was a lot of self-judgment and doubt. I didn't know why I needed this time, but I felt in my gut it was something that I had to do. There was some lesson to be learned, I just didn't yet know what it was. That lesson, it turned out, was that I had a wholly inaccurate definition of what it meant to be a failure and what it meant to achieve success. So I was becoming more self-aware. I was learning how to grow and challenge previous stigmas. I was even learning how to date. And just like my mother always hoped for, I met a nice man who happened to be one of my bar patrons. In a time that I had perceived to be the lowest point of my existence so far, life surprised me, and I found my soulmate, a lovely naval officer from Virginia Beach. And in circumstances that I never imagined could provide the atmosphere to experience deep and lasting love, I found a soulmate after such a crazy failure. Fast forward a year, I moved to Virginia Beach. I rejoined my career path as William & Mary's visual design coordinator, and I got engaged. Is now when I could say that I reached success? So, the big question, why did the millennial cross the road? Why should the millennial cross the road? The motivation cannot be to get to the other side, to get to success, because one of life's biggest secrets is that success is not a singular destination that you can reach. You shouldn't aim to get to the other side, to cross the road, but rather to stay on the road. Maintain your course, and know that these failures that you perceive to be that you perceive to be roadblocks are actually building blocks. That order is really important if you take anything away from today. So what about when it comes to defining success? I personally rely on Winston Churchill's definition, which he describes as moving from one failure to another without loss of enthusiasm. So what I propose you walk away with today is this. Number one, take every failure not as a loss, but as a learning opportunity. If you view failure as a process of trial and error, the fear, the self-doubt, and the judgment will start to fade away. Number two, know that you don't actually have to cross the road. You just have to stay on the road. Every failure you experience will challenge you, and you can either get off the road and stop moving or charge forward relentlessly. And number three, learn to train your mentality away from the personalization of I am a failure to I have experienced failure. Usually, it's not the failure itself that will hold you back, but rather the paralyzing and abstract fear of failure with a capital F. In reality, my failures and my setbacks aren't over. My life is not perfect, and I will surely experience setbacks again. Now, I have learned to find comfort in the fact that failure is a normal and acceptable part of life, particularly of young adult life. I firmly believe that failure is not a shameful word, and I will continue to talk openly about my deviations from the path, and I encourage you to do the very same thing. When I hit a roadblock at this point, I usually remember that it's not a road closure. Every failure is not a make or break experience for your future. We can and we will keep moving forward. We just have to be flexible and courageous enough to stay on the road. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a sophomore from right here at William & Mary. He's a finance major and an active participant on campus, a member of Muslim Student Association and Best Buddies. But today, he's here to share his story of adversity and talk about the importance of owning your struggle. Please welcome Kareem Alatar.
I've worn the same cologne every day for the past 9 years. No, it's not because I particularly love the smell, not because I lost a dare when I was younger, and not because I'm allergic to any other smell. It's because of a drastic change that happened in my life, specifically dealing with my father. I've been lucky enough to have a great relationship with my dad. Ever since I was younger, we've bonded over things like sports, food, politics, and pretty much anything in between. One of my favorite memories with him was this night in January. We drove around, we stopped at the mall, he picked out an elegant navy suit. We had dinner at our favorite restaurant. We reminisced, we talked about life, we laughed. I remember telling him how one day I was gonna be rich and successful. All he could do was smile. He told me, "Inshallah, Habibi." God willing, my love, in Arabic. We ended that night watching our favorite movie, Invictus. I grew up very affluent. We had a big house, fancy cars, and many luxuries. Money felt endless, and I'll be the first to admit it, I was spoiled. 10 years ago, I experienced something that I had never experienced before: adversity. My dad was going on a business trip, and with his passport in one hand and his bag in the other, he called me into his room. He opened a drawer, and out came a bottle of cologne. He handed it to me, and he said I was his man, and that I had to take care of my mother and my sisters. My dad usually sprays his cologne on me for a special occasion, like a birthday or a wedding. So why was I getting my own bottle all of a sudden? More importantly, why was he so serious? He was just going on a routine trip to the Middle East, wasn't he? And then I started to realize that things weren't so routine. 3 weeks had passed, and he hadn't come back. I kept asking my mom, but to no avail. I remember standing at the kitchen next to the stove, looking up at my mom, upset and confused, a tear down my eye. And I asked her, "Mama, when is Baba coming back? I miss him." A tear goes down her eye. The lie of "he'll be back soon" had finally expired. She told me that he wouldn't be coming back. I then realized and learned that my dad, a physician who had successfully ran multiple clinics in the DC area, had his offices raided by the FBI on tax fraud claims. Everything was gone. There was nothing left to our name. And just like that, the wealth, prestige, and comfort were all gone. My dad's offices were shut down. His license was revoked. We lost our house. We lost our cars. We even lost a lot of friends. Everything was happening so quickly. I was confused, and I didn't have time to process any of it. I spent countless nights researching and looking up every document, every article, every file online, just to figure out what happened with my dad. I learned that a lot of the case was actually politically driven, targeting the work he did for the US government with the reconstruction of Iraq. It wasn't about the taxes. I knew this unfortunate truth, but I wasn't ready to share it. I had to actively lie to my closest friends, fearing the judgment my family would face if they knew the truth. If someone asked why we'd move houses, I'd say, "We like the smaller house." If someone asked where my dad was, well, he was on a business trip. It was weird not having my dad around. In Arab culture, when there's a family gathering and the men are sitting on one side, it's customary for the man of the house to introduce himself as a way of representing the family. A couple weeks after I heard about the news, we went to a family friend's house, and naturally, I went downstairs to hang out with the people my age. Until my mom called me up and she said I had to introduce myself to the men. And at 10 years old, I was representing the family. I was the man of the house, like my dad once told me. Then the cologne started to make sense. It was my enabler. It gave me comfort in what was an intimidating entrance into premature adulthood. Some of the men, knew the situation, and they gave me a warm, comforting hug. Others were hesitant to even acknowledge it. And some demanded answers. A couple years ago, a friend of mine confronted me. He said, "I found this article online. Is your dad really working with Hezbollah?" I knew the article he was talking about. It was this piece of lazy journalism that said my dad had met with a Hezbollah official in Lebanon. The funny thing was he wasn't even in the country at the time they said he was. But there was no going back from that. It was hard to defend myself from a claim that strong. There was no lie or excuse I could come up with that hid my tracks. I was exposed, and the floodgates had finally opened. I had no other choice but to tell the truth. And so I did. It was the first time I'd ever told someone the complete truth. I was scared. I've witnessed my dad tell his closest friends the complete truth, only for that to be the last time that they ever talked to one another. I was scared the same would happen to myself. I was fearful of the judgment, but most of all, I was fearful that I'd lose a friend. But my friend was supportive. He said I was brave, and he respected me for my decision. And just like that, a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders, all at the hands of honesty. And that's when I realized I shouldn't keep hiding anymore. I started to implement a new policy of openness. You see, a lot of people try and hide their adversity as a way to protect themselves from being vulnerable, which naturally we all try and avoid. But the lies had built up too much, and I realized if I wanted to end the lying, I needed to own my struggle. I shared my story with my friends. They gave me a sense of comfort and home that I hadn't felt since my dad had left. Before, I always felt that there was a barrier in my relationships, no matter how close I got with someone. But as soon as I opened up, that barrier was gone. There wasn't a secret bearing over my head. I'm fortunate and thankful for everything that I have in life. I have a great group of friends, a group that I trust with everything. They were by me when no one else was. My father is still out of the country, and there are nights where I can't sleep because I'm excited and I dream of the day that one day he'll be at my graduation or he'll surprise me at my birthday. And there are nights where I think the opposite, that one day I'll wake up and I'll find out my dad was arrested or something worse. Nevertheless, we're in the legal process of bringing him back to the country that he deserves to be in a country where his voice deserves to be heard. But to be honest with you, I don't know what the future holds for us. I have two sisters. One is a soon-to-be lawyer, the other is an aspiring teacher, all under the guidance of my beautiful, brave, strong-willed mother. We are exhausted. We are frustrated, but we are surviving. Most importantly, we are ready to move past our struggles. And since I started owning up to my struggles, I've changed the way I view and understand people. Looking from the outside in, as cliche as it sounds, I stopped assuming. All of us have a struggle. And through this change in perspective, I realized that being open will set you free. You need to trust that others will judge you for you and not what you're going through. You see, all these years, I used the cologne as a way to mask my vulnerability. Every spritz brought back a memory from old times, and I wore it every day because the more nostalgic or nervous I was feeling, I'd put on more. The smell reminded me of home. The cologne gave me comfort, and it protected me from my vulnerability. To this day, I still wear that cologne, but for different reasons. As soon as I started owning up to my struggle, I owned what I used to hide it. I wear the cologne today because it is my honest self. It represents who I am, and it represents what I've been through. A lot of people will tell you that the best way to protect yourself from adversity is by hiding it, and it'll protect you from the pain that comes with it. But in reality, the first step of healing is often just opening up. Sometimes you'll need some courage. Sometimes you'll need some hope. and sometimes it's just a bottle of cologne. Thank you.
Our next speaker is an alumni of the college from the class of '83. She recently returned to Williamsburg, where she currently serves as an associate rector at St. Martin's Episcopal Church. She's here to talk to you about the ways in which people refer to the divine and the power that comes in shifting them. Specifically, the power of she. Please welcome Lisa Green.
Good evening. So when I was a student here in the early 80s, two women in our campus ministry group started agitating for change. They wanted us to say brothers and sisters in the Bible readings. They wanted more female readers, and they wanted us to change Lord into God when we prayed. I didn't get it. Couldn't they understand that brothers really meant all of us? Didn't they see that a reader's ability was what mattered, not his gender? And did they think that calling God Lord meant that we thought that the divine source of being was literally male? Well, about a dozen years later, I was at a worship service, and the priest began the communion prayer in an unusual way. Ascribe to our God the honor due her name. Bring offerings and come into her courts. I couldn't believe the power of hearing that little female pronoun. And I began to realize how we've been sabotaged by our shared custom of referring to God in exclusively male terms. So now I'm the one agitating for change, and I'm speaking from my Christian perspective, of course, but with openness and I hope relevance to those of you from other traditions or no tradition, and with deep gratitude for the diversity of our gathering here tonight. Language matters. If God is always he and never she, we're saying something profound about male and female here on earth. So, for example, I found this exchange in a little Q&A booklet. Why do we call God he? Because that is the least inadequate pronoun we can use. Think about that. Or this question from Sylvia in the book Children's Letters to God. Are boys really better than girls? I know you are one, but try to be fair. By letting words, titles like Lord and Father and King become synonyms for God, we've lost sight of the truth that the mystery is larger than any one metaphor. But we can turn things around. We can restore balance to the force by learning some new ways to think and talk about God. It's safe. It's not heretical. God can take it. And in this era of Time's Up and Me Too, and a female president, William and Mary, feels like the perfect moment to try out some female naming to explore the power of she. So the Bible, turns out, because Sue Monk Kidd in The Dance of the Dissident Daughter said this, which I think kind of captures what I'm trying to say tonight. When we truly grasp for the first time that the symbol of woman can be a vessel for the sacred, that it too can be an image of the divine, our lives will begin to pivot. And that turning, I think, starts in ourselves, and it can move out in our relationships and our society and our world. So the Bible has lots of images, names and images for God: male, female, non-binary, and non-human. Here's a sample from the theologian Elizabeth Johnson. Dairymaid, potter, fisherman, midwife, metalworker, roaring lion, an angry mother bear, rock, cloud, light, refreshing water, and life itself. In her book, She Who Is, Johnson focuses on 3 female images that you might want to try: mother, wisdom, and spirit. So mother. In many places in the Jewish scriptures, we see God laboring and nursing and comforting Israel, a mother that would never forget her child. And she's hidden in lots of places in the Hebrew word for God's mercy, rachamim, whose root is womb. So Isaiah says, God will rise up to show mercy, rachamim, womb love, to you. For the Holy One is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for her. My translation. Later in the Gospels, Jesus longed to gather the children of Jerusalem as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. And the English mystic Julian of Norwich said, "As truly as God is our Father, so as truly God is our mother." Then there's wisdom, a female figure of God's presence and activity that's found in the book of Proverbs and other Jewish writing. She was there at the beginning with the Creator, rejoicing in the inhabited world and delighting in the human race. Wisdom is described as intelligent, holy, all-powerful, more beautiful than the sun, pervading and renewing all things. And the Gospels make very strong links between wisdom and Jesus, weaving her themes of seeking and finding, and darkness and light, and feasting on bread and wine through his life and teachings. Like wisdom, Jesus calls the heavy burden to come and find rest, makes people friends of God, and gives life to those who love him. And for early Christians, calling Jesus the wisdom of God was not a contradiction with calling him the Son of God, or Messiah, or King, or Lord. It was just another lens for understanding who he was. So this wonderful line from Origen in the 3rd century: "We believe that the very word of the Father, the wisdom of God himself, was enclosed within the limits of that man who appeared in Judea. Nay more, that God's wisdom entered a woman's womb, was born as an infant, and wailed like crying children." Wisdom even gets a mention in a familiar Christmas carol: "O come, thou wisdom from on high, who orders all things mightily." Wisdom, just like Emmanuel, one of Jesus' names. And then there's the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, the giver of life, God's creative and freeing power at work in the world. Traditionally pictured as a dove, which is a symbol that's long been associated with female divinity and with fire and wind. And the Spirit, though technically without bodily form, was nevertheless commonly referred to in female terms, especially in the East, as in the Syrian prayer: "The world considers you a merciful mother. Come and bring peace and calm and spread your wings over our sinful times." Now, the Spirit should be the least threatening place to try out some female naming, to explore the power of she, and to say female pronouns as I do at church in the Nicene Creed: "She is worshipped and glorified. She has spoken through the prophets." Expanding our ideas, our ways of talking about and to God, helps us to remember that they are images, finite ways of trying to connect with the infinite. So male names are just as inadequate as female ones, and just as necessary. We don't want to take them away. That would be just as unbalanced. We just need to get some female and neutral imagery into the library and art collection in our heads and hearts and souls. And maybe saying she sometimes will help shake loose some of our earthly gender stereotypes, because a divine mother is no more unfailingly sweet and tame than human mothers. Fathers don't have to always be almighty. Wisdom raises her or his or their voice at the busiest corner. And the Holy Spirit is not always a peacemaker. Sometimes she stirs up trouble, inspiring us to take risks, to stand up to injustice, to tell unpopular truths. Expanding our ways of talking about God is really about embracing wholeness. If we can really see and know that all of us are made in God's image, maybe we'll have less to fear in one another. A bigger picture of the holy can give all of us the chance to unleash our full human power, to help bring about the world that God dreams of, her world in which all of us, of any color or creed or gender, can be heard and seen and loved. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a student here at William & Mary, about to graduate this spring with a degree in health sciences and kinesiology. She's a passionate advocate for mental health, specifically in South Asian communities, work that she does through her nonprofit, Dill to Dill. But today, she's here to talk to you about the journey that brought her here and the immense, invaluable power of a heart-to-heart. Please welcome Sydney Mundra.
21 months ago, I withdrew from William & Mary. 21 months ago, I couldn't walk up the stairs without support. 21 months ago, my blood pressure was plummeting. I had searing pain in my limbs, and I was always inexplicably exhausted. I couldn't function anymore. I sat in a lot of cold chairs in brightly lit doctors' offices, desperately searching for answers. I was poked and prodded with needles, hooked up to strings to some beeping monitor. What was doing this to my body? After countless doctor appointments with physician assistants, internists, cardiac assessments, rheumatology testing, chiropractic manipulations, it was all concluded that it was mainly the result of one thing: PTSD. You see, it had been a long time coming. I had been struggling with my mental health for a while now. I was seeing a professional, had tried a slew of different medications, but what was I supposed to do with this sadness? I tried so hard to paddle past the sinking feeling, fought to salvage a day of relative functionality, which I used to profusely apologize to the 56 unread text messages in my phone, and to maybe complete reading I'd neglected from class. I wanted so hard to dismiss my feelings, but they were volatile, begging to be understood and listened to. My therapist, Christine, explained that my body was giving up on me physically because of this mind-body connection. And it was about that time, that spring, my body had finally caught up with my mental state and reflected on the outside what was happening on the inside. It screamed, "I've had enough," and forced me to sit down and confront what I had been neglecting. So, I had to make a choice. I could either continue to resent my feelings, or I could choose to consciously and deliberately give myself a type of compassion and unconditional understanding I had never given myself before. I stopped fighting my feeling, instead started fighting for myself, and the entire world changed. I realized that my post-traumatic stress disorder was only the result of a terrified little girl having to hardwire in her brain chemistry that she needed to be guarded always. So, I thanked myself for the protection with feelings like anxiety and fear, and instead of repulsing them, welcome them, so that we could sit down at a table and manage whatever life was throwing at us. But why did it take me so long to come to this realization? Why was I so hell-bent on convincing myself that this wasn't actually happening? Well, I think it was probably the same reason my legs were trembling as I meagerly approached my parents to attempt to explain why I had to withdraw from the undergraduate education they had worked so hard to give me. I remember my dad's brow furrowed up in a knot of anger and frustration as he remarked that this was only the product of my lack of self-discipline and willpower. I quickly learned that mental health was not only foreign to them, but illegitimate. I mean, me, their young, smart, intelligent, privileged daughter that they've afforded everything to, is depressed? I mean, it just didn't make any sense. I can't blame them, because it was shortly after this I came across a very, very frightening fact. According to a study conducted in India just last year, around 71% of those who were aware of what mental health was showed evidence of stigma against it. I come from a South Asian heritage, highly rooted in our collectivist nature. We're a tightly woven community and value things like selflessness, unity, and conformity, but in turn, highly stigmatize mental health. I was falling out of the norm, an abnormality they had no idea how to address. It had only been taught and reinforced to them as a product of a lack of self-discipline and willpower. But it's not exclusive to just my South Asian heritage. It's everywhere. It's covert. Ignorance and stigma to mental health hides in statements like, "Girl, you're psychotic AF," or, "Oh my God, I'm going to shoot myself. This test is going to be so hard." It hides in jokes about needing to go to a mental institution, or think of another one. Oh, calling someone bipolar because of something just as simple as a mood change. Had I also internalized the stigma? Is that why I had fought with myself for as long as I did? Well, I needed my parents to come to the same realization I had. So as I do in most times of need, I turned to a friend and I had a heart-to-heart. A heart-to-heart. You've had one of those vulnerable, depth-filled conversations that somehow leave you feeling secure, fulfilled, and whole. After talking to my auntie and Husni, I found some strength to start yet another conversation with my parents, and resilience to tolerate any potential blowback. As it turns out, science tells us that feeling listened to and being understood quite literally changes our physiology to heal us. As my favorite psychiatrist, Dr. van der Kolk, explains, humans are profoundly social creatures. Having our emotions understood lights up our limbic brain system. A revelation. So how do we capitalize on this power of social support? I knew I wasn't the only one who was struggling. The answer to this question led to the birth of a platform called Dil to Dil, which in Hindi means heart to heart. Everyone see that okay? Yeah. As any good millennial, of course, I turned to social media for the answer, right? So I went to Instagram in hopes of creating a safe space where people could share their real, authentic narrative with mental health. I saw an opportunity for people not only to conquer and kind of claim their own struggles, but it will also have a great opportunity to teach the rest of us empathy and compassion and empower us to do the same. I remember my finger hovering over the post button on the app, wondering whether I'd be socially ostracized for publicly admitting to the Instagram world that I had PTSD. I was terrified. But what a life would I live if I let fear control this beautifully opportune moment to conquer and claim my truth. All I could ask myself was to trust in the process and also trust in the extraordinary human abilities like unconditional love, compassion, and solidarity. So, My very, very sweaty thumb pressed that button. And boy, did that act of courage pay off. Post by post, as I told my story, countless amounts of people, hundreds and thousands, engaged and became a part of this community. It was within the first couple weeks that I had 5 months worth of people scheduled to also share their story. I mean, it was the most revolutionary thing to me. That why don't we capitalize more on this simple truth? That vulnerability is strength, gives strength, creates strength, and reinforces strength. Our Dill-to-Dill community has now nearly grown to 2,000 people strong, spanning all across the globe. We're rapidly expanding with a wonderfully dedicated board, funneling many creative ideas into how we can continue to destigmatize mental health and create access for the resources we need. Not only have the effects of the conversations that we've started spanned across country borders, but they've also hit a lot closer to home. It's with complete confidence that I can say it's with pride and not shame that my mom and dad are sitting right there in the audience. My progress has not been linear at the least, don't get me wrong. But so many times, through the strength of those who have had the courage to share it through this platform, I'm reminded about how truly resilient the human body and spirit is, and how significantly much I've persevered through. So, I challenge you all. Challenge this idea that sadness is futile, and that frustration is negativity. Listen to your body, listen to your mind. Honor your reactions, because they are only a reflection of everything it is that makes up who you are now. Speak openly, freely, unabashedly, and unapologetically about whatever it is you feel, because you never know how a heart-to-heart may so impactfully save someone's life. I wish I could say this was a revelation that took place in 1 hour of sitting on my therapist's very, very comfy couch. But it took and is taking months, years of intentional patience, kindness, and acceptance. I wish I could also tell you that I'm fully cured and with my health completely restored. But I can do you one better. Even though it's not, 21 months later, I am working hard as hell every single day towards wellness, and intend on continuing to help thousands do the very same. So, with much love, from my heart to yours, thank you.
Our next speaker is an alumni of the college of the class of 2007. In her time here, she co-founded Students Helping Honduras, which is a nonprofit organization that helps to bring quality education to children in northern Honduras. And ever since then, she's only continued her journey of furthering education, as she currently serves as the vice president of the Dream Academy at the Future Project. And today, she's here to talk about how education should be a lifelong pursuit that sets you free, or learning as liberation. Please welcome Cosmo Fujiyama.
So this is a photo of my dad many years ago doing what he's always loved, which is skiing. He loved it so much that he eventually became a ski instructor on the slopes of Japan. And lucky for him that he did that, because he met my mom there. She learned how to ski from him, and they both fell in love with skiing, that they became instructors together. Their love for skiing is through and through. And as kids growing up, they took us whenever money and time and snow allowed out to hit the slopes because it's time to learn a lesson about life or two, my dad would say. Imagine this, 2 ski instructors taking 4 kids down icy hills on sticks. Sounds like great parenting. That's called building up your strength. My dad is in the front of the pack, modeling the way, and the little kids are like little ducklings following behind him. And mom is in the back, gently encouraging and leading from behind. I love to ski now. It's taught me a lot about life. Dad was right. It's taught me that you can pick your own path when you get better. It taught me that falling is inevitable, but did you get back up again? It taught me that you can sometimes veer off into the trees, and Lord, did I do that. But you will always find that cup of hot chocolate down at the hill. What I learned, though, and remember most, though, is that my favorite times skiing actually weren't even skiing. It was just sitting on the lift with my dad, sharing tips about the previous run, getting a bird's eye perspective of the others below, flowing in their different ways. It was that chance to really get a lift moment, to step back and to reflect. And I believe that life is actually full of lift moments. When you take some time to step back and reflect, ask some questions, and think for a purpose. Life's lift moments, I believe, are a part of the most important skill of the future at this moment of crossroads of learning. And to me, that is learning how to learn. As a coach and as an educator, I think a lot about learning all day, every day. Learning, learning, learning. It's my favorite topic to think about. But it's less about what I know. It's more about how can I help another person create an intentional lift moment in their life, to actually use their life experiences as the teacher, to make meaning of what they just experienced in a new way, to step back and to ask questions that allows the brain to make new connections never imagined possible. Literally just breathing can do that for our beautiful brains. I work at an organization called the Future Project, and our mission is to help young people discover who they are and to activate their power. And I do this because I want to make lift moments possible for more young people to determine what they want to learn and how they go about learning that with their unique learning styles. I'm lucky to do this with an amazing group of fellow dream directors and other adults who support young people in building a greater sense of belonging, a sense of belief in what's possible, a greater sense of purpose and power. Because I don't want, and nor do my colleagues, we don't want to leave learning to chance. We don't want to leave learning to zip code. We don't want to leave learning to your ability, identity, or to your style of learning. For me, if learning is about liberation, we want to find pathways where you can touch and tap into your own knowledge as that liberating force. Today, I'm going to share a few ideas that I've learned along the way working in the learning industry in my life that I hope can help you learn how you learn in your life, that you can walk from this auditorium today and apply them in your life right away. The first technique is to think about learning how to learn as the requirement is to map your own course. As an Asian American growing up in suburban Virginia, that's me, super cute looking, I was oscillating between 2 cultures. One at home speaking Japanese, and then outside of that home translating English, dependent on whatever was the dominant language. And it wasn't until right here at William & Mary, which I adore and love, and that's why I'm back to talk about this today. At this American Studies program, my teacher said, why don't you create a reading list to discover all the authors that you haven't read yet? And it was the first time in my life that I read a book by an Asian American author, let alone a Japanese American female author, Monica Sone, who wrote about her Nisei experience growing up in the West Coast in the 1900s. I read her words, I was like, this could have been me. But that's the thing. Before that time, I didn't know that my words could matter. I didn't know that I could write a book or that I could even create my own curriculum. And I thank William and Mary for that and the audacity of my teachers that said, Cosmo, you don't need my permission to write your own life syllabus. Take the pen and go. And that's what my work has been as an educator. Encouraging all people to think about your life curriculum. And what are you learning to keep up with the change that is inevitable in this economy? How are you learning not just what you know, but how you need to learn what's next and coming ahead? 79 is the average life expectancy here in the United States. That means for many of you in your early 20s, 70% of your life still left for lifelong learning. Isn't that amazing? You think you're done after college? Honey. That's 70% more time for you to think about what you want to learn. This is my life map. This is how I think about the things I want to learn, because I have written my own job description so many times because new jobs didn't exist a couple years ago. I have also learned things on the job when I didn't know how to do it, and I said, I want to learn. Give me the opportunity, and that is how you lead. The second idea I want to leave you with around learning how to learn is that it's not about being right. It's actually about deepening your joy and your curiosity to learning. You know, when you're skiing and you're feeling a little rigid and you're going to fall, you got to let go. That's a little bit of the essence of this. 66% of college students have reported that they feel overwhelmed with studies at school. 50% of 5th to 12th graders say they feel stuck. And 70% of adults in the workforce feel disengaged. I'm going to let that sit with y'all for a moment. These negative emotions have a profound impact on our brains. It has a profound impact on our brain's ability to actually learn and to make connections because of the amygdala's hijack. And what happens is that these moments of discomfort are inevitable when you learn something new. I'm not saying that that's not going to hurt and be difficult, but when those learning zones touch into panic or into comfort, you can actually have ownership to take a minute and have a little lift moment for yourself. You can even say that out loud. I'm having a mini lift moment, everybody, so they know. I do that sometimes, and they know what I mean. That means step back. Take a moment to step back. For many years, I worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs around the globe that came together for a week-long period to play, to learn, to work together. And they came to the program to learn technical skills about how would they grow their business or how did they solve this sticky business challenge they were encountering. And time again, even the most go-getter of them all would say, Cosmo, the most important part of this program was the perspective I got from different people. It was the opportunity to slow down and ask questions I was afraid to ask myself because I haven't been able to stop. It was the moments like this that led social entrepreneurs to say, I want to pivot my company not from a place of pain and shame, but from a place of possibility. I want to take my business succession plan with honor, not with sadness. And I want to think about my personal wellness as important as my corporate wellness. These moments that we were creating out in nature were these retreats for the mind, to rewire possibility and take it away from panic. Now, not everybody can take a whole week off into the mountains. I recommend it. It's a wonderful thing to do. But you can also think about a couple questions that allow you to take a moment, literally to breathe and to step back. And these are 3 that I recommend. What am I learning right now? What's going on here? What am I learning outside of just the visible learning? What's the invisible learning that I'm learning? And what is the gift here? I always say that there's a gift here, especially when there's moments of struggle and pain. What is the gift here? And finally, what am I committed to learning? Because learning takes effort, and your commitment will elevate what you learn. And ask yourself that in that moment. And sometimes it might be, you know what? This is too much. I got to take a step back. And that is okay. The idea is that you get to choose. The third and final idea that I want to share tonight is that learning is a group practice. It's a community effort. So build a learning team and stay accountable to each other. Our school system, our businesses were set up a century ago in a factory-based model that minimized relationships and maximized standardization. The future is going to look different. And we're going to need different forms of learning that actually look at the diversity of all of our community members and think with equity and inclusion as the lens of how do we actually elevate our learning abilities. My learning teams look like a couple different things. It looks like a community of people who identify as women of color working in tech and social innovation. We come together every month in New York. We sit, we eat, we talk. We create a psychologically safe space to discuss whatever is on our minds. It also looks like my digital communities. After those retreats I was talking to you about, we also stay connected on WhatsApp. And I have hundreds of people that I'm in touch with every day that share resources, that celebrate the small and the big wins. And it's all through a digital connection. It also looks like my quarterly P&Ls with my very near dear friend. And it's not P&Ls for profit and loss. It's P&L for purpose and love. And over a cup of coffee and some croissants, we actually check in and say, how are you doing in your work? Are you still in love with what you're doing? How are you pursuing your purpose? And we literally gut check each other so we can walk the walk and stay connected and accountable. And finally, it looks like our dream directors at the Future Project, people that are creating positive adult relationships in communities where this is necessary, so that more people and more young people have a safe space of belonging that allows their learning edge to be farther and deeper. So I bring us back to the lift, because as my father said, skiing is not just a sport, it's a way of life. Learning is not just a skill, it is a way of life. And I believe that the future of learning depends on all of us leaning in to take learning as a powerful tool of liberation and of freedom that makes all of us stronger. Thank you.
Our last speaker tonight is a government professor here at William & Mary. His classes focus on topics like constitutional law, criminal procedure, and the death penalty. He comes here today with a message for all of us, especially the students, one of compassion and perspective. He comes to suggest that though it might not seem like it now, there are more important things than this midterm. Please welcome Jackson Sasser.
Let me begin by echoing Mike's comments off the top and thanking Grace and Alexander and their robust team for pulling this off. They already had completely full agendas before they took this on, I have no doubt. So would you just join me in thanking the students who have pulled this off tonight? I'm grateful to you for being here. I'm grateful for the invitation. I'm grateful to my own partners in the enterprise, the 1,000 or so students I've taught in the last 10 years. I'm particularly grateful to 30 or so who coached me up earlier this week. Some former students got in on that act too, from Boston to New York, from Oxford to Amsterdam. These young women and men have allowed someone who's from where I'm from and who looks like I look and who even sounds like I sound to teach what I teach. And what I teach principally is how our legal system and how our death penalty regime in particular affects people who are less privileged than I am. And speaking generally, less privileged than we are at a place like William and Mary. You heard from Sydney, you heard from Kareem, so you won't be surprised when I tell you that every day these students remind me why ours is work worth doing. You are, horizon lifting. I think a lot about courtrooms and about classrooms. Both are crossroads, sites where lives change direction. And both are competitive environments where people are told precisely what to look for, but too often fail to listen with a keen enough ear, and often to our peril. With the rare exception of things that happen at Wawa after midnight on the weekend, our very own OK Corral, as I call it, the experience of college students and participants in the criminal justice system brook little comparison. I am not here to analogize those two things. I want to be very clear about that at the front. But I would like to discuss a common calling that they both ask of us. And this came to mind in response, as most of my worthwhile thoughts do, to a student's question. Caroline is a student in my first year seminar. It was her birthday 2 weeks ago yesterday. Did we sing? Of course we sang. And then she looked at me in a very direct and disarming way and said, "What advice do you have for one newly 19? If you're in my line of work, you need to have an answer for this question." 3 things came to mind. The first was, you might think about getting your nose pierced without telling your parents, if your parents are the kind of parents who would drive 7 states to wish you a happy birthday. Caroline's parents were already on the road, so the expiration date on that advice had passed. My folks are here tonight, incidentally, so Caroline may be able to get me back for that. Hi, Mom. The second thing that came to mind was that I hope Caroline will take the kind of listening that we're trying to develop in our class, listening across lines of difference, listening for the unexpected detail, listening for the hidden truth. I hope she will take all of those things into court when she's called to serve on a jury at 29 or 39 or 49. My classes are built on stories too long unheard, stories that went sideways when the right person in power simply wasn't listening. No one seems to have listened to Henry Lee McCollum for 30 years until the 2nd of September 2014, when he was exonerated from North Carolina's death row after serving 11,000 days for a crime in which he had no part whatever. The judge who authorized Mr. McCollum's release happens to share my family name. He is Douglas B. Sasser. When I learned this, I did exactly what you would do if you were teaching a death penalty seminar. I started calling everybody involved in McCollum's case, and when their assistant picked up, I just said, "Tell him Sasser's on the phone." They took my calls. I wish you could all have the experience of speaking to a capital defense attorney 24 hours after her client has been exonerated. I really wish that we would stop pretending that we can meaningfully distinguish between who deserves to live and who deserves to die, but that's another talk. McCollum's attorney told me that he and his half-brother were intellectually disabled teenagers pressured into signing false confessions, that the police failed to test crime scene evidence and failed to share with the defense the evidence that they did test, that the prosecution overlooked a nearly identical murder committed a month after McCollum's arrest, and that when DNA evidence proved that another man had committed the murder, the prosecutor disclaimed it and opposed McCollum's release. These prosecutors were looking for a win, which to them meant a conviction. They were not listening. But even McCollum's own attorneys failed to hear his denials. One met with him in prison 10 times. Let us underscore this. His own attorney met with him in prison 10 times and begged him to plead guilty. We have got to do a better job hearing the accused, disproportionately people of color, and in capital cases, people who suffer from poverty, abuse of all kinds, addiction, mental health conditions, treated and untreated, and discrimination from individuals and institutions alike. And our deafness is systemic. Every day, courts make evidentiary determinations, literally deciding what in a defendant's story will be worth hearing and what will be outside the aperture of their case. Virginia gives us an example of this from just recent weeks. Mark Lawler, one of the 3 men on Virginia's death row, had his 2011 sentencing overturned by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals. Those judges found that Lawler's sentencing had excluded key expert testimony that the Constitution permits. And if I may share just one more example of our failure to listen, it happens every day in courts around the Commonwealth. Virginia law suspends the driver's licenses of those convicted of even the most picayune crimes. These women and men, who often work hourly jobs unlikely to excuse absences when transportation fails, also incur hefty fines and fees. And when they fall behind, and how could they not fall behind? Their licenses are apt to be suspended all over again. So I hope Caroline listens for these half stories. I hope she wants to find the fuller truth. But our alumni have potent examples of how she can do more. 2 of our alums are clerking for the federal district judge who will very soon determine if Virginia's license suspension regime is constitutional. Another will lead Mr. Lawler's defense in his resentencing in weeks to come. And a third, next month, will begin her work at the Center for Death Penalty Litigation, the group that walked Henry Lee McCollum out of court as a free man. All of these alums know that James Baldwin had it right. If you truly want to know how a country administers justice, you go not to the police, not to the lawyers, not to the judges, not to the protected members of the middle class. You go to the unprotected, those precisely who need the law's protection most, and you listen to their testimony. My students and I try to listen our way out of our own experience. But that experience itself, our classrooms and our colleagues to our left and to our right, also cry out for careful, compassionate listening. And that's the third thing that I thought of when Caroline asked me for advice. I'm not sure if you've noticed this or not, but our classrooms can become competitive environments. The admissions gauntlet that you ran and the gauntlet that my friends and I throw down before you 2 or 3 times a week asks you to distinguish yourself at every turn. Better, faster, stronger, as my track coach used to say, a little more colorfully. And hand out the whistles, I guess, because Gallup yesterday released a poll that said that 1 in 4 college students considers their instructor someone who cares about them as a person. At least that many of us have gotten a blue book with a note including this, which I did some years ago: "Page left blank for my tears." I chose to take that as a joke. I hope sincerely that it was. Our zero-sum, offer-no-quarter approach to education, to life, has real consequences. We feel burdened by wrong things. We feel burdened by ephemeral things, things that matter not in the fullness of time. I make a big ask of every class I teach. I ask them to swim against this powerful current, to look not only up but around, to not throw away your shot, sure, but also to remember that we're here for a good time, not a long time. You sound surprised at that, no? The world's major religions are with me on this. They tell us to put somebody else first, as CJ and I say to our children, and also to let compassion guide our steps. Compassion, literally, to suffer with. And we all suffer. We are all crooked timber. Or as I hear you say to one another a dozen times a day, same. But here's the tea. I got to be honest, I learned that earlier this week, but I'm still going in. The tea is this. I'm almost done, but I'll work it in more. The tea is that even more, even though we're more alike than unalike, even though what's most personal truly is what's most universal, we can't know what one another is going through at any given moment. Whether our trivial is someone else's serious, or whether our serious is someone else's bona fide trauma. I can't know, I may never really know, what my former student was feeling when 3 years after our class and 3 days before his senior year, he took his own life. But Peter's the reason I'm here tonight. And Peter's who I think of every time I tell my students I'm thinking of them. And I invite them, I implore them to think of one another. So I hope you will. I hope you'll look out for each other. I hope you'll listen to each other. I hope you won't be afraid to go there, to say when you're hurting and to lock arms with someone who is. To bear, as the scriptures suggest, each other's burdens, just like my students did earlier this week. One of my very best was having a tough go, and she had the courage to put a name to it. She left the room. 2 beats later, another student said, I'm going with her. I've never been prouder in a classroom, because there are so many many more important things than this midterm. Thank you.
Before we close out tonight, I just want to take a minute to introduce you to all of the amazing people who helped make tonight possible. Events like this wouldn't be possible without generous funding from our sponsors, like Student Assembly, the Office of the President, and the Office of the Vice President. We also benefited from amazing faculty support from people like Ann Arsenault, Drew Stelgis, Mark Patterson, and the entire Office of Student Leadership Development. I'd also like to take a minute to thank the people who planned this night for over a year and the people who joined us this week to help make today happen. Would the members of the TEDx Executive Committee, our sponsors, and our support, and our volunteers all stand to be recognized? I cannot tell you how much of a pleasure it has been to work with all of these individuals over the past year. Come on out. And finally, last but not least, let's bring out our speakers for one last thank you for these amazing talks. And from all of us here at William & Mary TEDx, thank you. And of course, the best way to thank you is to feed you. So we have a wonderful reception planned for you. If you would all exit up through the back stairs and the doors behind you, we have a reception in Tidewater catered by Spice Palace. Thank you.